Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic in Evony, defense general. If you hear any grunting in the background of this video, apologies for that. That's just the dog. He's very clingy, and if he wasn't in my lap grunting, he would be outside my door, scratching and barking, so I think the grunting is probably less annoying. So yeah, apologies for that. Hey guys, before we get into the video, real quick, we're going to talk about today's sponsor, and that is FlexOn Mobile. Now, FlexOn Mobile is the company that publishes Evony and other games on alternate app stores. So that means they're not the developers of Evony. They don't control the prices. Don't be mad at them. They don't have anything to do with the stuff in the game. They just take the game as it is, take it to alternate app stores, and publish it there. They publish Evony on Huawei, which is AppGallery, One Store, Samsung, and Xiaomi. So if you're playing Evony on any of those alternate app stores, which oftentimes have better prices and deals than your basic ones, you know, the two big ones I'm talking about, you're going to be dealing with FlexOn Mobile. So that's who sponsored today's video. And they want me to real quick talk about some offers that AppGallery has. Now, the link below will take you to this page so you can view these offers. And AppGallery updates their offers all the time. I've done sponsorships with them in the past. Y'all know I like AppGallery. But let's talk about what AppGallery has right here on this page. First of all, first thing you're going to see is how to install and use AppGallery. You got the button here to download AppGallery, which is pretty simple. We have the HMS core, which, if you're not familiar, that is the software that makes AppGallery run. Since it's not native to most of the devices you're going to be using, you're going to need it. You can create your account and install Evony, and then you're set up. It's pretty simple. Now, Huawei has some offers, and they change and refresh these offers a lot, and they're all pretty good ones. For example, we got a €5 purchase. You spend €5, and they'll give you a voucher for €3, which is 60% back on your money, which is a pretty good deal. So if you're going to spend money on Evony, you can get a little bit back. Got one for €20 where they give you €5 back, €50 and they'll give you €20 back. They're also running a offer where if you join the Discord, they'll give you €10 gift code for €10 to spend. And to get that, you're just going to contact Juan's in their Discord. I've worked with her before. She's very helpful, always glad to help. And if you have any problems with AppGallery in general, definitely reach out to her. She can help you with all that stuff. Yeah, just a quick ad. That's all we got for this ad, and let's get into the rest of the video. First category we're going to talk about is the assistants, and we're going to cover assistants for all the categories and just assistant stuff in general. First category, we're going to talk about mounted assistants. Specifically, the stat we're looking at right here is for the mounted attack. Now, we're looking at the attack separately from the other buffs because attack is generally considered to be one of the, if not the most important stat to buff, especially for defense, considering that the defender gets the first hit. So the more pain you can inflict on the first attack, the better you're going to be off in the long run. So for mounted generals, for assistants, if you're looking to buff purely your attack, you could do Mori Montanari with 135, Hermes with 135, Hakon Haraldson with 125, or Chen Yaojing with 125. Now you may notice something, none of these are actually defense generals. That's because in the assistant slot, you're generally going to see that regular defense generals are not as good as just regular dedicated generals for that troop category, with a few exceptions, and we'll cover those. But yeah, so of course in the future, they're going to release new mounted generals. So if you see a general that has a universal clause that they release in the future, make sure to check the spreadsheets because they get updated regularly. Check the channel for a new video. We'll talk about them when they come out, and we'll see how they perform compared to other defensive generals. But for right now, in the moment, we've got these guys that are our top 4 contenders for the damage of mounted attack in the assistant role. And in the future, there's probably going to be ones that are better. So just keep that in mind. For mounted overall, if you're looking for just overall buffs for the mounted, meaning attack, defense, and HP, we've got the same 4 guys for the top 4. Mori, Hermes, Hakan, and Yao Jing at 375, 355, 355, and 330. Now you notice these are not like super huge total buffs, mainly because they buff primarily one troop category, but that's about what you're going to get from an assistant. Assistant buffs are not super high when compared to the main general, but they are a significant little booster. So if you're running something like a Boudica defense and you're looking for something to boost your mounted troops a little bit more, get a little bit of an edge, instead of running another mounted defense general to assist her, like whoever you would run, maybe consider just running an actual mounted general with the universal clause, and you'll get better performance out of them that way. So that's one situation where I think that these guys could be very applicable. Also, if you're just running a different type of defense, maybe you're running like mainly siege defense, but you want to buff your mounted troops a little bit, or whatever defense you're running. An assistant that buffs one troop category can complement a main general that buffs another troop category quite nicely, and these guys are pretty good contenders to fulfill that role. Also to note, these buffs also include Boudica as an assistant. So if you're not using Boudica and you wanted to use her as an assistant to buff mounted troops, just don't, because you could use one of these guys instead and they're going to do a better job than Boudica would. Next category, we got the ground attack. Once again, we're looking at the ground attack stat first. At first place, we get Isaac Brock. He buffs the attack stat the best at 141. One of the rare cases where the actual defense general does a decent job as an assistant. We got Gao Chenggong, Lucilla, and Maria Carolina at 135, 131, and 130. All coming in pretty close. Pretty similar defense stats across the board. And when we look at overall stats, we got Zhang Fi coming in at 321 total buffs, Gao Chenggong at 320, Lucilla at 315, and Maria at 311. Now, if you'll notice in the last slide, we did not see Zhang Fi. That's because his total attack is not top 4. It's below the 130, but he does have the highest total buffs for mounted, so he's not going to give you as much attack, but he's going to give you a bit more defense and HP. And also, I'm including Brock down here because I know y'all are going to ask about it. Yes, Brock gives you 296 total, so still quite competitive across the rest. So if you're looking for an assistant for your ground march, and you have a decent bit of options available, you can say, how much do I value the attack? Do I want to put Isaac Brock in there for that? Do I want to put Zhang Fi and just go for raw stats across the board? But also keep in mind at the end of the video, we're going to look at overall stats, and I'm just going to tell you right now, Isaac Brock is going to buff other troop categories as well. Not a ton, but he will buff a little bit, and that does put him in as one of the better generals for overall buffs across the board compared to these other guys. But when we're just considering ground troops, Zhang Fi is the best overall for overall buffs. Isaac Brock is the best for attack. And then these other three are going to do a fine job as well, with just a little bit different stats in different areas. Really, it's going to come down to who you have available. I doubt somebody has all 5 of these generals ready to go, fully ramped up, and is just trying to decide which one. You might probably have one of these guys ready, and they're not doing much, so maybe consider throwing them on the wall if that complements your current defense setup. Next, we're going to look at the ranged attack. We got the new general, Almo's the first, coming in at first, 155 attack, which is pretty nice. Tied with Gonzalo for 155. James Cook gives you 140, and Sigurd gives you 125. So we could see, especially in this category, Sigurd came out a good couple months ago, and he's 30% behind Gonzalo and Amos. So we can see the power creep that Evony does. If we redid these stats in 6 months, we'd probably see Amos and Gonzalo on the bottom end of this, and some new random generals giving you 165, maybe even 170. So do keep that in mind. In the future, these guys are all going to get power crept. But the thing you should notice with this is there's no defense generals. These are all just basic ranged generals. So if you're trying to run a ranged defense, or you just want a ranged assistant, instead of going with someone like Zachary Taylor, you'd probably better off be going with an actual ranged defense general in terms of total buffs for that troop category. One strategy that is reasonably popular and effective for low coiners is to run a ground troop main general with a ranged troop assistant. I've heard good things about that defense, so maybe that's one that y'all should consider. Next, for the ranged overall stat, we're going to notice Amos is at 340. Gonzalo is at 155, but that's probably a typo.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
After consulting the spreadsheet, Gonzalo does not give you 155 buffs across the range category across. That's a typo on my part, my bad. But we're recording this now. We're running out of time for producing this video. Sponsors want it published pretty soon, so instead of fixing that and wasting a couple hours doing so, we're just going to tell you it's 340. Apologies for the typo. But yeah, Amos gives you 340 buffs across the board. Gonzalo will give you 340 across the board also. Franz Josef give you 305. Sigurd will give you 330. And down here we can see James Cook will give you 300. You will notice that we change out James Cook's for Franz Josef in this. That's because Franz Josef is top 4 for overall. James Cook is not. So, yeah, they're pretty close. So if you're considering to choose between Franz or Cook, Franz is going to give you about 5% buff overall, but more of that buff is going to come from attack on James Cook, so Franz will be a little bit more survivable. Cook is going to be a little bit more damage heavy. But that's the situation with them. Also, Sigurd, he does have a good bit of his stats stacked in his survivability. He comes up to 330. He was a good bit lower on the attack compared to the other generals, but when we look at overall stats, he gives you stats in other areas as well, so he's a little bit more survivable. And once again, looking at the overall stats across the ranged troops, there's no actual ranged defense general that can compete with these guys, so do keep that in mind. For the siege attack, we got Ursula 163, Stephen II 135, Francis Drake at 135, and Maurice de Saxe at 130. Now, you will notice, once again, no defense general. Not even the new defense general will give you as much buffs as an assistant for the siege category. So if you're running a siege-only defense, he's not going to give you as much attack. When we look at the siege overall, 379 from Ursula, 320 from Stephen, 365 from Francis, 335 from Champlain, and 305 from Maurice de Saxe. So these are the top contenders we're looking at for siege, with Ursula being the clear winner overall across all the categories. She'll probably hold that spot for a while if I had to guess. So if you're running a siege defense, Ursula's the clear winner. But these other 4 guys are also all pretty solid options. Now, for the final category. This is for the every single category stacked together. What are the total buffs for ground, mounted, ranged, and siege that they're going to give you. This also shows you who the leaders are in terms of just like overall buffs across the board for the assistant category. And kind of shows you some of the weaknesses of the defense generals in general. First place is Zhao Yu, 588, which is pretty high. New general, if you have a copy of him, based on the recent poll that I ran, most of you aren't going to have a copy of him, and almost none of you are going to have him as a full-fledged defense general fully ascended. So, probably not one that a lot of y'all are going to have. Probably not one that's even worth running for the amount of investment that you're going to need. Unless you have a super hyper-specific defense that you want him for. But there's a lot of other generals that can also fulfill the similar roles. Ursula gives you 470 total buffs across the board, which is very high. Pretty close to Zhao Yu, only behind by about 110%. Isaac Brock, another defense general, coming in at 459. Pretty solid buffs across the board. Tied with Zhang Fi for 459 buffs. Now, when we just look at the raw numbers overall, you might automatically assume Zhao Yu is going to be the clear winner in choice, but it does depend on what you want out of your assistant, out of your defense in general, and what you're going to run. So this is the breakdown of where these stats are actually going. Zhao Yu gives you 117 to mounted, 117 to ground, 167 to ranged, and 187 to siege. So when we compare him to the others, he is very broad across the board. He buffs all of the troop categories, slight favoring on siege, but pretty solid buffs across the board. So if you truly have a universal defense, you want to buff every single troop category, Zhao Yu is a good defense general for you. If you look at her Scylla, she will not help your mounted or ground at all. She's going to give most of her buffs, 379% to siege and 91 to ranged. So a slight buff to ranged, major buff to siege. More than Zhao Yu is going to buff your siege. So if you're running a siege defense, her Scylla is a great option. If you're running a ranged siege hybrid, also a great option. Or if you just need somebody to buff siege category for a different type of defense, she's a good option. Isaac Brock gives you 31 to range, 31 to siege, 101 to mounted, and 296 to ground. So spread out a little bit. He doesn't give you a whole lot for ranged or siege. Most of it goes into ground, and a little bit goes into mounted. So mainly just a ground assistant. But he does give you a little bit of other areas as well. Slight boost to your range to siege, which I don't even know if you'll notice a difference with just a 31%. If you compare him to Zhang Fi, he gives you 6% to your range to siege, 126 to your mounted, 321 to your ground. So he's going to buff the mounted and the ground better than Isaac Brock is by a considerable little bit. But the stats that Zhang Fi has over him in mounted and ground go on to range and siege for Isaac Brock. So you could change these two out. Whichever one you have available is probably the better option if we're being honest. And if you have neither of them available and you want to know which one to choose, I would say probably choose which one is easier to get. Because I don't really think it's going to make too much of a difference either way. 30% buff in any category isn't probably going to be the factor that sways and changes your defeat into a win or a win into a defeat. It is a good little boost. If you're looking to min-max your ground defense, then Zhang Fi would win. If you're looking to do a hybrid mounted and ground, Zhang Fi probably as well. But if you want to spread out your buffs a little bit more for whatever reason, Isaac Brock can help you out there. But also realize 30% is 30%. Most players have at least 2,000% base buff. So, I mean, 30% isn't a super whole lot. For the next section of this video, we are going to return to the Excel spreadsheets. This is because we have run out of time for making this video. But if you've watched this far into the video, I think you're probably more interested in the numbers than the colorful figures and graphics. So we're just going to roll with it and we're going to go into Excel. Now for this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about the main defense generals. But primarily what we're going to talk about is how to use these tools for yourself. Because as we know, Evony is an ever-evolving game. In 6 months, when they release new generals, most of this information is going to be, well, not dated, but there's going to be new generals and stuff that perform better than the ones we've already discussed. So I'm really going to give you the tools how to make these decisions in the future for yourself. And I'm even going to show you where these, like, how I made these numbers. Like, it looks nice when you put it into a Photoshop and make the picture look nice, put the numbers over them. But in the end, it's all just Excel data. That's all it is. So if you've used these siege before, you are familiar with the yellow category being the base skill of the general, the red category being the full ascension, meaning 5 red stars, the green category being the specialties, the blue category being covenants and skins, and then these light blue categories being the totals. So if we are looking for a mounted defense general, this is for the main general, we can say let's sort by attack. And we can see the top generals for attack on the mounted troops would be Mori Montanari, Hermes, Cheng Yaojing, Hakon Haraldson. Queen Boudica is way down here at 325. So these regular generals are going to buff your attack of the mounted by a considerable little bit. Now, We could also compare the defense values. We can see Boudica's at 354, Montanari is 385. We can compare the HP values, or we can also come over here to the overall charts. This one is going to combine your attack, defense, and HP for each category. And then this category right here will be the total buffs overall. So attack, defense, and HP for each of the 4 troop categories into one big number. So if we want to look at overall mounted buffs, Mori Montanari will come in first place, 1,135%. Total buffs across the board. Boudica only comes in 6th place at 1,015%, so about 100% behind. So if you were to use Montanari as your mounted defense general instead of Boudica, what you're going to get is you're going to get an attack, a defense that deals more damage but is a little less survivable. Boudica is going to be a little bit more survivable on the survivable side, but not by much. And when we look at the totals across the board overall, we can see that Montanari is going to be right here, 3,147. And then we will find Boudica way down here at 3,036. So these two generals are actually very close in terms of buffs, in terms of defense, and what you're going to get from them as a defense general. So when you factor in the fact that you don't have to keep Montanari on the wall, he can go and do other things as well. Boudica's just tied to the wall. If you already have Boudica invested into considerably, obviously it's probably not worth changing her out for Montanari. But if you are looking for a new mounted defense general, you're wondering, should I go for Boudica? Should I get somebody else? You should probably get somebody else. Or what you could also do, if you want to wait like maybe 6 months until Evony releases a new mounted general with a universal clause that can also be used on the wall, that's also a viable strategy. And that's going to apply for pretty much all of the troop categories as well. Of course, Boudica is very specialized for mounted troops. Other defense generals tend to be a little bit more spread out in their buffs than Boudica, but the same basic premise applies. Every defense general you can use for each that buffs primarily one troop category, you can use a regular general with the universal clause in the same role. It's probably going to be easier to get them, to be honest. It's probably going to be cheaper to get them also. And it's just going to be more versatile. It's going to be a more versatile general that you can use in more roles. You can use them for your attacking march. You can put them in the Senate. You can do a lot of things with them. But with the defense general, you're not really looking at a whole lot of flexibility there. You know what I mean? But let's look at some other troop categories as well. Let's just look at the ground overall. If we're looking at the overall buffs for the main general, Zhang Fi, first place, 1082. Militares, 1076. We got Frigg at 1069, and Isaac Brock at 1016. Now, these numbers are all pretty close. Performance between these is going to vary based on, what their attack, defense, HP values specifically are, but it's not going to be super huge or game-changing. The main difference between them is going to be the overall buffs. You see Isaac Brock is giving you 3,335 overall. Frigg is only giving you 3,070. So Isaac Brock is going to buff a little bit more troop categories than these other guys. But if you're just looking for a ground general, they're all going to do pretty much about the same thing with not a lot of difference. So Isaac Brock, if we're going stat for stat, min-max your defense, is going to be the best ground defense general. But for the average player, any new ground general that comes out that has a universal clause, or Fi or Militares or Frigg, are going to perform well enough to get the job done. It's not going to be a huge difference And I think it's a better investment strategy based on just the flexibility that you get from using a regular general. If we look at the range troops, 1,100 total. We got Franz, Takabana, Sigurd, Godfrey, Wesley, Louis the Ninth, Subite, and finally in 11th place overall for buffing ranged, Zhao Yu. And then Zachary Taylor comes in 14th place. So Zhao Yu gives you 942 buffs. He does give you significant buffs overall, 3,608. So he is very good at that. But if we're just looking at one category for just a range defense, these other guys are going to do as good a job buffing them. It's just your other troop categories are going to suffer. So you also need to consider like who's actually going to be in your castle taking hits. Do you have a T1 meat wall where buffs don't matter and only archers behind it? Are you going to have a lot of siege machines in there as well? Are you going to hide your siege machines? What buffs do you want and where? And then, like, just the cost effectiveness you have to consider as well. Like, is it actually worth investing however much money you would need to get Zhao Yu? Or is Franz going to be good enough to get the job done? When we look at Siege, similar story once again. Champlain, Xiao Shonajon, Maurice Desax, Melisande, Zhao Yu coming in at 11th place. Takenaka coming in at 12th place. So Takenaka and Zhao Yu are very expensive, very premium, and very good defense generals. But they're only going to give you 962 and 952 buff to your siege, respectively. Whereas Champlain is going to give you about 200% more buffs. Of course, Champlain's only going to give you 3,200 overall buffs. Takenaka and Zhao Yu are going to give you 33 and 36. So they're going to buff other categories as well and give you a better full roundabout defense. Champlain's mainly going to be siege overall. So these are the areas that we need to consider. And also, look at these numbers here as well. Champlain does not really have any native buffs for ground or mounted. These numbers here, these come only from his stats, his base like attribute stats. That's the number that when you go on the cultivation tab and do a cultivation, you can see in there it says plus whatever percent. This is what that percent is. So his base stats is going to give you 652% total buff to your mounted troops, to your ground troops, and then this stuff to the ranged. So it's not like you're, by using a totally siege general, that you're completely sacrificing buffs to ground and mounted. No, you're still going to get a good considerable amount of buffs to that category. If we're looking at mounted, 652% from Champlain. If we compare that to Zhao Yu, 852%. So we are only losing out on about 200% buff off of the mounted, and we're going to get that 200% back on the siege. So you get what I'm saying? It's give and a take. It really depends on what you want from your march, what you're willing to sacrifice, what you want to tweak. But in the grand scheme of things, even a difference of total buffs going from 3,200 to 3,600, that's 400% buff across the board. Which, if you're a player with base 2,000% buff for all your troop categories, so 2,000%, like 2,000% attack, defense, and so 2,000% attack, defense, and offense, that's 6,000% total buff per troop category. Times that by 4, that's 24,000% buff. So if you were to put your base buffs into this spreadsheet, if you're a 2,000% base buff player across the board, that would be 24,000%. So you really have to ask yourself at that point, is a difference of 400% across the board, is it really that much of a deal when my base buff across the board is 24,000%? When we're talking about like percents of a percent, Yes, they do matter. They are important. I already know somebody's gonna be in the comments yelling at me, but I think it's not as big a deal as some people would like you to believe, and especially not as big a deal as Evony would like you to believe, because they love to release generals that are just slightly marginally better, and they want you to spend money to get them. But is the return on your investment really worth it? Is what I'm saying. So, I guess that's all I got for this video today. Feel free to disagree with me. Leave a comment below. Leave your thoughts and opinion. Read the comments below. Other people love to point out things, different viewpoints, and I find some of them to be very useful and insightful. So feel free to engage with each other and leave something helpful for other people. Hope y'all found it informative, and I'll catch you on the next one.